Willkommen in einer Fragens-Video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 7 of my game design series of videos. In this video I'll be providing a brief overview of World War II and Cold War divisional or greater scale rules. I was originally not going to bother with rules with an element scale of division or higher, but I did discover some rules which did surprise me in this scale. As a result, I've decided to create a video covering this unusual scale. I must admit these rules are barely suitable to be called rules, as you'll see later in the video, but I thought I'd do the video anyway because we could discuss the feasibility of a set of rules at this scale at the same time. This is actually my first attempt at covering the scale. As with my other video, there is a strong focus on investigating game systems at this scale, but nonetheless this video will provide some benefit for players that are interested in the rules that are actually available. However, the bulk of the video is really a discussion of the feasibility of this scale. This video will cover rules which I call divisional scale, where each element or base represents a division. I will also cover rules where an element is a corps or army, but as this is not my main focus of the video, this will only be briefly covered. At divisional scale, a player can command up to 50 divisions, which can cover a lot of campaigns. Perhaps not the invasion of Russia or even the full invasion of France in 1940, but it can allow a player to refight Kursk or similar sized battles. If a game uses an element scale of one division, the game scale is army group. To have a game which lasts within a day, you need to keep the total number of elements down to 100 or 50 per side or equivalent. This does limit a game to 50 divisions. However, at this scale, divisions may be leaving and arriving as reinforcements, so the limit of 50 applies to the average over the entire game per game turn. The real limiting issue is duration by number of elements. At 50 elements over 12 game turns, you can have a game which is an optimal target that allows you to complete a game within a reasonable period of time with a conclusive winner or loser. If a game turn represents a week, then you can cover a campaign which in this case lasts for 12 weeks. I suspect a scale of 2 weeks per game turn is also possible, which allows you to cover 24 weeks or 6 months. If your scale is each element represents a corps, then these scales then scale these values accordingly. But again, main focus here is one element is a division. Let's take a quick look at headquarters. In most cases, the lowest rank headquarters will be the army, of which 5 will be deployed, and an army group headquarters is the highest rank headquarters, which represents a CNC or the player himself or herself. My primary source is Stephen Balagan's site, which I highly recommend to any gamer. The link will be in the description of this video. Only 2 rules fall clearly into the divisional scale or larger scale category. This is Drive on Moscow and Hell's Gates. It was Stephen's site that made me do this video, because prior to that I didn't even realize that there were any credible divisional scale figure gaming rules out there. I have to admit at this point that I considered for at least the last 20 years that an element equals a division scale figure game was not viable or even sensible. In my case, my second homegrown set of rules actually used this scale, which is the reason why I don't think it's credible today. I used Airfix 172 scale tanks at table tennis table, chalk to draw the map, which was normally Europe, or the Eastern Front or the Western Front. The rules were as simple as you could get. The defense value of a tank was its maximum armor divided by 10. The attack was its gun caliber divided by 10 and rounded to the closest whole number. Movement value was its maximum speed in kilometers converted to centimeters divided by 2. If an attack was 8, which meant the gun was 7.5 centimeter gun, you threw 8 d6 dice, with 1 being a hit. The defender would then throw a number of d6 dice equal to its defensive strength, which, if it was a Sherman, would be, let's say, 8. With a 6 being a save. If the number of hits exceeded the number of saves, the defender would retreat that number in centimetres. If unable to retreat, it would be eliminated, or if the number of centimetres was too great, I can't remember what it was eliminated. These rules did not really give me a very dynamic game, to put it mildly, and quite frankly, not a particularly enjoyable experience. After that unsuccessful experience, I never thought much about this scale and still consider it unsuitable. But I know gamers who like it, so perhaps I am wrong. Drive on Moscow is an iPad wargame by Shenandoah Studio. German player commands 2 or 3 army corps. The Soviet 2 or 3 fronts. Most units represent entire German corps or Soviet armies, although the occasional specialist Soviet corps appears, airborne for example. The ground scale is huge. The map covers a big chunk of the USSR, everything covered by Operation Typhoon and the Soviet counter-offensive. Moscow, Tula, Voronezh, Kalin, Kaluga, Oral, Kursk, Riez and Bryansk are all featured on the map. The map is divided into regions, not hexes or squares, each of which is roughly 20 to 40 kilometres across. Full campaign runs for 22 game turns, each representing between 3 and 5 days of activity depending on the weather. Units are at their best when they're in supply. Supply lines are traced through friendly controlled regions to supply bases on the friendly base edge. Out of supply units suffer a penalty in combat. If the supply situation worsens and a unit becomes isolated, then it cannot fight. If supply deteriorates further, then it's isolated and begins to suffer losses. Stephen Balagan has converted this into a tabletop game or figure gaming format. These rules aren't an exact mapping to the original iPad game, but close enough to give you a sense of how it plays. The major difference is that regions have been replaced with a regular grid of hexes or squares. Each hex square is 40 kilometres across, from flat side to flat side. Assuming 10 centimetre hex squares, that is a ground scale of 1 in 40,000 scale. Steve Balagan has also converted the Engel matrix game framework system into a figure game of set of rules. I'm uncertain what mechanics he uses or what this Engel's matrix game framework gives you in terms of rules. Without much detail, I cannot say how viable these rules are or even how to obtain them, but someone is giving the scale a decent shot. The 2 games I've covered so far are not exactly a divisional scale and really only give you a rough idea that there is some development at this scale or greater. Philip Sabin's Hell's Gate is a board game simulating the Coruscant Pocket of 1944. Stephen Balagan has converted this into a figure gaming format using hexes and figures. The German Commander-in-Chief commands Army Group Center. The Soviet Commander-in-Chief has both the 1st and 2nd Ukrainian Front. A base, well, a counter if you use the board game, is usually a German division or Soviet corps. Some smaller units, Soviet divisions or German regiments, brigades or battle groups, are also included to hold thinly defended fronts. Each hex on the map is 20 kilometres across. The game lasts 8 turns, each represents 3 days. Panzergrouping 2.2, which I've covered in the regimental scale video, is a set of rules created by Martin Rapier, with version 2.2 coming out in 2021. I've covered these in the regimental scale section, but they can also support divisional scale figure gaming. The scale is 1 in 100,000 and it does use hexes. While these are valid sets of rules, it's really scraping the bottom of the barrel. A number of the rules I've covered so far are either board games or computer games converted to figure gaming format, which I suspect is the correct course for these type of rules. If I was going to pursue this scale, I would use Panzergruppen Graderian or the PGG game system as my bedrock. The armour is regimental or brigade, with only infantry being divisional, but I suspect this is the correct scale for this type of game. Refighting the entire Eastern Front with figures is possibly not a valid project, for figure gaming at least, but you can certainly refight some of the operational campaigns. These rules use a hex scale of 8 kilometres, but as with my other board game conversions, the first thing I would do is remove the hexes. I've done this many times for other rules, and this gives me a scale of 8 kilometres per base width. If the element are 3 centimetres wide, then this is a scale of 1 in 240,000. This would work, but I'm wondering how many people would be interested in it. When moving up to the divisional scale, there are a number of points which need to be understood. The main one is ground scale and game turn scale. These rules are obviously not going to be concerned with armour penetration values and probably will not have direct fire combat in any manner which figure gamers would understand. While you can still create a figure game set of rules in order to cater for this scale, this is going to have to be a very board gamey mechanic type set of rules. The key objective is to avoid making the rules feel like a board game. Otherwise, you're better off staying with a board game, which is the main reason why the first thing I would do is remove hexes or grids. The ground scales that you should use for divisional scale probably range about 1 in 240,000 and depend a lot on the figure scale. Whatever the scale, there is no range fire, with only aircraft providing some sort of range support. This is firmly board game territory, but not something figure gamers cannot handle if the rules are designed well. As for the time scale, it depends a lot on the ground scale, but 1 week per game turn is probably optimal. There is no night, day or sudden dust storms in a game turn for these rules, but you can still have heavy snow, heavy rain and other prolonged weather effects based on season. As for the combat system, using one of the combat systems common in the board gaming world would be the best choice. I suspect an odds-based CRT may be a good starting point. To add flavour, you could try something more complex, but I would personally stay with something simple if at all possible. Movement trays or big bases may be an idea, especially if your units or elements require strength points. A base which can contain 4 elements would be optimal, so each unit or division can have up to 4 steps. You could even place the correct regimental size element in your division, 3 infantry and 1 artillery regiment for an infantry division, for example. I personally feel one of the largest issues with the scale is the playing area. I like nice playing areas, and I don't want to create a board game map as a playing area. This is why I prefer a PGG scale to the whole front scale. With PGG, a standard figure gaming playing area would work, with roads and rivers only representing major roads and rivers. Once you increase the scale, you are drawing a map, which means you're entering the board game Uncanny Valley. I'm still not certain who would be interested in this scale, as a board game achieves this with a lot less effort. Perhaps someone who wishes to refight the entire 1943 German offensive, Citadel, and Soviet counter-offensive would be someone interested in this particular scale. And so we come to the end of my episode 7 of my video on Micro-Armour game system design, which in this case is providing an overview of divisional or greater scale figure gaming rules for World War II and Cold War periods. Alle guten Dinge, kommen zu einem Ende.